Yes, so better start. Good morning to everybody. My name is Cecilia Pennacini. I'm the president of the African Studies Center in Torino. And I'm very happy and proud to welcome you. Can you hear me? Thank you. To welcome you at the Water Diplomacy and Culture of Sustainability Conference, which has been organized by our Center of African Studies, together with Hydroaid, the International School for Water and Development. And I should say I'm very happy to host you in my department, the Department of Culture, Politics and Society of the University of Torino. I also bring you the greetings of my director, Professor Franca Roncarolo. She apologized she can't be here, but we are very happy to have the conference here. I will just spend few words to thank, first of all, Emanuele Fantini, who is the mind under who has conceived this important initiative. Emanuele, I think everybody knows him, but holds a doctorate in political science from our department, so I'm very proud. And he's now lecturing at the Delft Institute for Water Education in Holland. And he, moreover, he is a specialist of Ethiopia, where he has carried out extensive field work. And let me also thank the director of the African Studies Center, Federico Daneo, and the secretary, Mirella Nicola, I think she's outside, for the big work they have done for the organization of this event. And of course, I would like to greet all the guests from Africa, first from Norway, and from Italy. For some reason, we did not succeed in inviting also a representative of Uganda, where the source of the Nile are. But I have carried out research in Uganda since for 15 years now, so I feel to be somehow part of Uganda. And I'm also happy to have here one PhD student from Makerere University, Nicholas Mugabe, that you will meet him, who is here within the Erasmus Partner Countries program we run together with Makerere University. So even Uganda is represented together with all the countries of the Nile Basin, I think. South Sudan, I start from the south, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt. So I don't want to waste more of your time, and I leave the floor to Emanuele, who will introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Terry Tvedt of the University of Bergen. And thank you very much. I apologize because I will have to leave you for some time to fulfill my didactic duties, but I will try to be here as much as I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you very much also to the African Studies Center of Turin, and the whole team for such a great organization, to Hydroaid. Also, I think to the local water authority of the province of Turin, who is supporting this initiative. It's called ATO, Ambito Territoriale Ottimale. It's quite a technical name, but for water people, I mean, you're familiar with this technicality, but I think it's important that also to acknowledge the fact that a local water authority working to distribute, to regulate and distribute water within the territory of Turin and its province is also looking beyond the physical border of our own province and funding initiatives on international development, international relations, and water that flows in other countries and in other continents. But there's one thing that I learned from Terry Tvedt, reading his books and also watching his documentaries is that one sentence of him I like is, the Nile is African water, but is a world river. I think we've seen yesterday, both through the visit at the Egyptian Museum, through the concert, and later to Terry's documentary, that of course it's a river flowing in Africa, but the Nile is a river that has shaped the world imaginaries. In the documentary, Terry was mentioning how tourism was born 2,000 years ago under the Roman Empire on the banks and on the Nile River. So I think, and that's also why we are here to learn, to share research about the Nile. In the documentary yesterday was also all the legacy of the colonial past, of history, on the history of the Nile River and Nile hydropolitics, and of course for us as Italian, that's a very, particularly when it comes to Ethiopia and Eritrea, that's a quite important past, significant past, that unfortunately in Italy is often forgotten, I think not adequately investigated and reflected on with a critical approach, and I think that's a pity. It's a pity if we consider that an Italian company nowadays is building the biggest African dam, the one that's going to be when it will be completed, the biggest African dam, is building that on behalf of the Ethiopian government, but and of course this dam is sparking controversies, tension, opening up also spaces for cooperation between the different countries. A phenomenon which has not been investigated, I think as an Italian researcher, together with our Ethiopian colleagues, we should aim at investigating, is how this dam and the process of building the dam is creating connection and flows of people, of knowledge, of resources, both material and immaterial, between the two countries. And I think this will also help us to rethink and reconsider the history and of the Italian presence in that region. So that's perhaps something we can think of. That's a call for fun, another call for fun. But without further ado, I'm very glad to introduce Terje Tvedt, who has kindly accepted our invitation. And Terje is both professor of geography at the University of Bergen, but also professor of global history at the University of Oslo. Is also filmmaker, as you have seen, most of you have seen yesterday. And I think that's, I like to recall this double background, because it already tells how, in order to study and to understand water, you need to be interdisciplinary. Of course, history, geography are closer than history and engineer or natural sciences, but already I think we should think in terms of interdisciplinary approach, and you will see that also we are trying to practice it in the panel that will follow. We gave a quite hard task to Terje, because I told him there would be mostly graduate or master students from the University of Turin that are not that familiar with the Nile, so he prepared a sort of introductory speech to the Nile. But if I look at this room, of course there are people who are very much familiar with the Nile, so, but I'm sure you will, and Terje will find a way to interact and stimulate your reflection. So thank you very much. Terje, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes.
I will then try to give a kind of introduction to some of the preconditions for the current political debate about the control and use of the Nile. But first, since we are in Italy, we have to talk about Mona Lisa. And I do this perhaps a little bit strange, but I asked somebody of the Italians here and asked them, why did, this river in the right corner of the picture, what does it do there? Because when Leonardo da Vinci made this picture in 1504 or something, of course he could not imagine that this picture became the most famous picture in the world, because he had painted a lot of bourgeois women from Florence. Well, what some historians have figured out is that this river is in fact illustrating what Leonardo da Vinci was really concerned about at that time. And that was not this woman. It was the control of the river Arno. Because the river Arno is going through Florence. At that time, there was a struggle between the Italian city-states, Florence on the one hand, and Pisa on the other hand. And the man in charge of administrative business in Florence at the time was Machiavelli. The famous the famous man who's written so much about power, the prince, how to, manipulate others. So at that time, and exactly at that same time, Machiavelli and Leonardo da Vinci was planning for diverting the river Arno away from Pisa in order to crush Pisa in the internal battle of supremacy and power in Italy. And they even carried out the project. An engineer tried to build levees in order to stop the water running into Pisa. But he failed because the Arno River was so strong that the levees were crushed by the river itself. So, next time you see this picture, you will think about the conflict of water and the tyrannical power of water, if you exploit it. And you also then know that the question of conflict of water is not something new. It has been there forever, of course, since you all know that the word rival means two people sharing the same stretch of river. That is the etymological background for that word. So, as background to the Nile question, Mona Lisa could be used. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about Nile, and as you know, it's a very, very long river. It's shared by 11 countries, soon 500 million people, but at the same time, the amount of water the river carries is quite modest. It's about 84 billion cubic meters of water a year, which is not very much. It's the same as the Rhine. It's nothing compared to the Amazon. And when you talk about big rivers, you have to consider very much the particularities of the different river basins from a hydrological and geographical point of view. I've just been along the Amazon. If you're upstream of the Nile, you have the potential of reducing the water flow with some impact downstream. If you are on the upstream of the Amazon, it doesn't matter, because you will have no impact whatsoever on what's happening in Brazil. The Amazon River is starting in Peru, in the old Inca area, Machu Picchu and all that kind of things. That's a big tributary of the Amazon River. You can do whatever you want with the river there, it have no impact whatsoever on Brazil. So long rivers are not the same. And to be an upstream power is not the same in the Amazon River as it is on the Nile River. It's very, very important to understand that we have to grasp the particular hydrological characteristics of each and every river basin in order to understand how politics are played out. Just one comment, perhaps first, to the notion of the Nile as a world river. This is again from Italy. It's from Rome, Piazza Navona. This is the sculpture made by, it's from 1600, and it's the four sacred rivers of the world. And here is the Nile, of course. At that time we didn't know the source of the Nile, that's why he's blindfolded. But the point is that the Nile, in European history, in Christianity, has played a very, very important mythological and religious and cultural role. The whole worldview of the Middle Ages were very much concerned about rivers coming from heaven, and the Nile was one of them, as it is described in the Bible. So therefore, I think it's fair to say that Nile is not only an African river, although it is an African river in the geographical sense, it's also a world river. Okay. In order to understand what happens today, I think it's important to understand the birth of the modern Nile. Of course, you all know that the role of the Nile was tremendous in the development and the history of Egypt for thousands of years. But basically, the Egyptians' relations to the Nile was more or less the same or unchanged from the day of the pharaohs until the 19th century. And then a man called Muhammad Ali took power in Egypt, and they started some minor changes to the Nile system, but the real modernization of the whole concept of Nile control came during the British Empire. When Britain occupied Egypt in 1882, everything changed. And in order to understand the current relationships between Egypt, Sudan, and all the different countries on the Nile Basin, you have to understand what happened during the British period. As I said, they occupied Egypt in 1882, not because of the Nile, but because of the Suez Canal. You know, the Suez Canal was considered to be the swing door to the empire, to India. So for that reason, it was very, very important for the British Empire, the biggest empire in the world, of course, to control Egypt, because if they controlled Egypt, they also controlled the Suez Canal. What the British understood almost immediately after they took control of Egypt was that they had become the ruler of a country that was 100% dependent upon the Nile. If you should develop Egypt, if you should create stability in Egypt, then you had to involve yourself in the control of the Nile. So the British government, from the very beginning, imported hydrological experts that have worked in India, for example. As you all know, Britain was very much involved in irrigation in India during the 19th century. They imported experts to Egypt, and they created a kind of a hydrological regime that for the first time in history considered the Nile as one hydrological and political unity. It was during the British that the Nile came, and that the whole Nile, more or less, came under one rule for the first and only time in history, around 1910, 1915. So, during the British Empire, the whole Nile was conceived in a modern way, in the sense that they put up plans for improving the Nile, for controlling the Nile from the source to the mouth. And in 1904, I mean, it's more than 100 years ago, they formulated a plan that, in a way, it pointed to the future, in the sense that very many of those plans that they described at that time are plans that today are implemented. Not exactly in the same way, some are bigger than they considered them, than they planned them, of course, but the way of thinking. I mean, they planned a canal through the southern Sudan, they planned dams on the Nile in Sudan, they were discussing a dam on the Lake Tana in Ethiopia, they were talking about dams on Lake Victoria in Uganda. You know, they had huge visions for how to control the Nile in order to support British interests in Egypt. And these interests were, as I said, strategically, because of the Suez Canal. Then economically, they were looking for cotton for the textile industries in England. And in order to produce more cotton in Egypt, they needed more water, of course. And they needed water during summertime, because cotton crop was a summer crop. So, because of these strategic and economic interests, they developed a vision of the Nile seen from the interests of the downstream countries, seen from the interests of Egypt. Everything should serve the British interests in Egypt. And then, of course, a lot of things happened. You had the Egyptian Revolution. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but you had the Egyptian Revolution in 1919, which eroded British power in Egypt to a certain extent. And that forced the British to start thinking also about developing other countries in the Nile Basin for their own benefit. So one of the reasons for the Egyptian Revolution in 1919 was, among other things, that the Egyptian nationalists, they were furious at the British, because at that time they planned to build the biggest cotton farm in the world in the Sudan, the Gezira scheme. And the British needed that cotton, of course, because development in Egypt made the cotton supply from Egypt less secure because of political developments. So they went for this biggest cotton farm in the world in the Sudan, and they knew, of course, that this was the same as, you know, throwing a red cloth in the face of the Egyptian nationalists. You know? Because then the Egyptian nationalists could say that, what are the British doing? Well, they are denying us our water. They are taking water from us. They are stealing water from Egypt. That was the part of the rhetoric of the Egyptian nationalists, of course. But the British, they thought more about their economic need for cotton than the Egyptian opposition to their plans for the Sudan. But the point with saying this is that from the beginning, I have to repeat, the whole Nile was seen from a downstream perspective. They formulated plans, they described the whole Nile system for the first time in a modern way as a political and hydrological unity that should serve the British interests in Egypt. Then political developments made this strategy less and less in line with British strategic interests. So they also had to develop policies for the upstream countries, or for the other countries than the Egypt, like Sudan, and later on also Uganda, Kenya, and so on and so forth. But and then you had the development in the 1920s, as I said, when the Egyptian nationalists became very much opposed to Britain. But at the same time, then the British needed to maintain relationships with the government of Egypt. So that was one reason why they entered into this very, very famous Nile Water Agreement of 1929. I don't know whether you have heard, many of you of course know a lot about the 1929 agreement, because it's so fundamental in the whole discussion about what was going on in the Nile. What happened, I mean, the 1929 agreement was, from the British point of view, an effort to regain Egyptian support for their position at the Suez Canal. Because during the 1920s, are you following me? I mean, are you at all familiar with this, or is it becoming too detailed? Too detailed?
It's fine.
It's very difficult to know.
It's okay, go ahead.
No, because as I said, you had the Gezira scheme that the British planned in the 1920s after the Egyptian Revolution, and then you had strong nationalist sentiments in Sudan as well against British imperialism. And then in the early 1920s, the Governor General, the British Governor General of Sudan, was killed by Egyptian nationalists. And just after that, a very, very famous move within the history of water conflict happened. It is called the Allenby Ultimatum. The Allenby Ultimatum of 1924, where the British government threatened Egypt very openly that if you do not do as we say, we will take your water. They tried to punish Egypt because of the Egyptian nationalists who had killed Sir Ali Stack, the Governor General of Sudan. This, of course, created a lot of uncertainty in the relationship between Egypt and Britain. In order to repair that, Britain said in 1929, we will in the future, Egypt, guarantee you all the water you need. That was one sentence of the 1929 agreement. And they also promised that on behalf of their colonial territories in Eastern Africa, that is Uganda, Kenya, all these countries sharing the Nile, they said that these countries, they do not really have an interest in the Nile because they have plenty of rain. So they guaranteed, so to speak, Egypt that we, London, shall give you all of what you need in the future, and the upstream countries, they have no need for water. So they, in a way, promised that these countries should not put their start to demand water from the Nile. That is the 1929 agreement, you know. And up to this day, this is a very contentious agreement. I mean, there's a lot more to say about it, of course. Egypt basically says that this agreement is an international agreement and is thus binding. You cannot change an international agreement. Because if you change one agreement, what will happen then? You will open up a Pandora box, right? And you will have a lot of conflicts all over the place. The upstream countries in Uganda and Tanzania and Kenya, they said that, listen, this was an agreement entered into on our behalf by the British colonial government. It cannot be binding on us. And President Nyerere of Tanzania, he went to The Hague in 1963, asked for support for his interpretation of the 1929 agreement, saying that, no, this cannot be binding on us, and he lost. The Hague said that, yes, this agreement has to be followed, because you cannot change it like that, although you were colonial, you were a colonial territory at that time. So, in order, I mean, the point is that in order to understand the power of this and the role of this agreement, also in order to understand or handle the disagreements about this agreement, I think it's important to understand the historical background to how it was formulated and entered into and became, so to speak, one of the first, if not the first, real international agreement about an international river basin that was not concerned with communication at all, but with control in much wider sense. And then, I mean, you can say the same about the 1902 agreement. I don't know, again, this might be a little bit too for specialists, but in 1902 the British entered into a kind of agreement, at least that's what the British say, with Ethiopia when it comes to the Blue Nile. Britain at that time were mostly concerned with the White Nile. You know, the Nile consists of two tributaries, the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The White Nile is a long one, but it has very little water, less than 10%. The Blue Nile is a shorter river, but it has 86% or something, but with all the rivers coming from Ethiopia, it's about 90% of the Nile. The British were not interested in the Ethiopian rivers at that time. Why? Because they could not control it. It was not possible with the technology available at the beginning of the 20th century to control the Ethiopian rivers because of all the silt. The British were concerned with the White Nile, the long one, because that river carried the water that they needed to grow their cotton during summer. That's why they occupied Uganda in 1894, Southern Sudan 1896, 89, 1998, and so on and so forth, because they wanted to control, to have, I mean, the British imperial strategists, they understood very soon after they had occupied Egypt that in order to control the Nile in an efficient and rational way in Egypt, you needed to control the whole river. So they occupied Uganda in 1894, as I said, in order to take control of the Lake Victoria. Already at that time, they were discussing build a dam on Lake Victoria, 1 meter high, and Egypt will have 30 times all the water the country will ever need. In 1894. At more or less the same time, they planned to build a canal through the Southern Sudan in order to increase, to double the amount of water of the White Nile during the summertime. This is in the 1890s. But Ethiopia they were not concerned with, because they knew that those rivers had too much silt and all the water came during the winter time. They didn't need the water during the winter time because cotton did not grow during the winter time. So therefore they entered into an agreement with the Emperor of Ethiopia, Menelik, where the British, according to the British, Ethiopia promised not to build any storage, any dam on the Blue Nile or other tributaries of the Nile that in any way could reduce the water flow of the Nile. That was the only thing they were interested in. Not develop Ethiopia, not to dam the Blue Nile, but please don't do anything with it. It's the same agreement that the British entered into with Italy after Italy had taken and occupied Eritrea in 1891. Why could the British allow Italians to occupy Eritrea? I mean, Britain had told the whole world that the Nile is our sphere of interests. The Nile is ours. They allowed Ethiopia to occupy Eritrea, although it's Nile country, right? Because the Kese River, the Affari River is a border river between Ethiopia and Egypt, Ethiopia and Eritrea. But they allowed the Italians to do that because the Italians promised not to build any structure on any of the Nile tributaries in 1891. And the same policy they applied to the Emperor of Ethiopia in 1902. So then they were secured. Nothing could happen on the Blue Nile. They had control on the White Nile. And Egypt then will argue that this international agreement from 1902 is still valid. Why shouldn't they say so? An international agreement does not ain't functioning because it's old. I mean, it has to be replaced by another new agreement in order to not be binding anymore. While Ethiopians say that they don't, that there was an agreement, did they have a sign and whatever. So it's a lot of conflict about that 1902 agreement as well, of course. My point is that in order to understand the current relationships on the Nile, in order to understand the role of this river in the current politics of the African continent, because what's happening on the Nile is of course very, very important for the rest of the continent. I mean, the Nile Basin covers 1/10 of the African continent. 500 million people, and very powerful countries like Ethiopia, Uganda, Egypt. I mean, what these countries do will have spillover effects for whatever happens on that continent. So, that's why if you are to solve these problems, I think it is a very good idea to, or it's necessary to understand the history behind all these agreements, because the past is in the present in the Nile Basin to an extent that you do not find in very many other places in the world. Because all these agreements, or both these agreements, are there, although they were formulated and entered into a long time ago. I'll just show them some clips from the different. I made this documentary as you talked about. It's available on Vimeo. It will be available on Amazon soon, I think. But I can just to show how magnificent, I mean, the Nile Basin is. There is no river, as far as I know, and I've gone through most of them, that can show such a variety of ecological variation. You know, different types of ecosystems, different types of nature, different types of culture, different types of religion. I mean, it's so complex and it's so magnificently varied compared to all the other river basins I know. And as I said, I've been down the Yangtze, Amazon, just come down from Mississippi. And Mississippi is so dull, it's nothing compared to the Nile. I mean, it's the same thing, more or less. For a long, long time, you know, just American plains. But here is everything. So this is just Egypt.
It's going to be very difficult for Egypt because, you know, we need more water. The amount of water that we have today is barely enough for the Egyptians of today.
And in the next few decades, there will be 70 million more Egyptians. How will the new generations get the water they need? Just as one does not think about the importance of water until the well has run dry, so we need to go into the desert to understand Egypt's dependence on the river. From above, we see clearly how the Nile is the difference between life and death. The water from the river colours the desert green. Egypt's agriculture is surrounded by the Sahara Desert. Here, nothing grows. There is no smell, no sounds except a lonely wind. The desolation of the desert is overwhelming. 90% of the country looks like this. Surrounded by this landscape, one of the most impressive civilizations in world history evolved 5,000 years ago.
South Sudan.
In 2011, something happened that was even more dramatic for the future of the Nile. Sudan, Africa's largest country, was divided into two countries. Here, people in South Sudan celebrate that they have achieved independence from Khartoum after decades of war. Sudan had to give up over a third of its territory. But much more important, it lost much of the Nile and those parts of the country that had an abundance of water. Sudan was overnight reduced to a desert country even more dependent on exploiting those parts of the Nile over which they still had control.
I will declare the independence of Southern Sudan.
After almost 50 years of civil war, South Sudan, in 2011, separated from Sudan. South Sudan is a weak and poor state, but as we shall see, the world's least developed country holds the key to the entire region's future, because of the way the Nile flows through its landscape. Ito was one of the rebel movement's leaders for many years. I meet her when the excitement of independence is running high. In South Sudan, the Nile is, however, much more than just a rich reservoir of myths and religious stories. When the Nile here meanders slowly across a vast, completely flat plain, it creates a very unusual water landscape. A landscape that has determined what types of societies could develop and the area's geopolitical position. When the river overflows its banks in the rainy season, it forms a wetland area larger than the Benelux countries combined, and here live millions of people. For long periods, transport on the river has been blocked by floating plant debris. 2,000 years ago, this stopped Roman soldiers in search of the Nile sources.
Uganda.
It was in this part of Central Africa that European explorers travelled in the 19th century, seeking the answer to the greatest geographical mystery of their time. Where was the source of the Nile? These explorers were the forerunners of a European race up the river and of the colonization of Africa. Their books about unknown people and exotic animals caused a sensation in the drawing rooms and salons of Europe. This stretch along the river is called Para in the local language, or Hippo Home. The White Nile's largest waterfall is called Wanyok, or House of the Spirits. This waterfall has been an ancient centre of occult rituals, and for Uganda's dictator Idi Amin, it was a suitable place to throw his opponents to the crocodiles. It was also to this waterfall that the then colonial secretary and later British Prime Minister Winston Churchill came over 100 years ago. Here stood the young Winston Churchill in the early 1900s and predicted that hydropower would make Uganda the powerhouse of East Africa. He envisioned factories and warehouses along the many waterfalls of the country.
Yep. And you can go on. I mean, the Nile in Burundi is of course different than the Nile in Rwanda. It has played a different role in the history of Burundi than it has in the history of Kenya, and so on and so forth. And even Serengeti Plain, I mean, many people have seen pictures from the Serengeti, I suppose. I mean, this animal migration. And what people do not normally realize is that this is part of the Nile. I mean, this is a Nile river. Serengeti is part of the Nile basin. So it just underlines how enormous and how extremely pluralistic the Nile basin is. And it also therefore underlines the necessity of understanding not only the historical background, but also the hydrological and geographical characteristics of the river. Because of these hydrological and geographical characteristics, the role of Kenya, of course, in the whole Nile game is very different than the role of the Sudan. Or the role in Burundi will be very, very different than the role of Ethiopia, because of these obvious geographical differences, but differences that have to be reflected upon and understood in order to appreciate the different standpoints of the different governments and the different states that have an interest in how the Nile is used and will be used in the future. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much. Terry, I think the floor is open for questions. If you prefer, you can also talk in Italian or other languages, and we will try to translate.
No questions? I don't believe it.
Can you have the mic?
I don't see any.
Okay.
Maybe
I think everyone can hear my voice.
Can you also introduce?
Yes, my name is Yasser Surur, and I'm an ambassador at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, the Director of Water Affairs in my ministry. Actually, I don't have a question, but a comment about what you have presented to us. I agree that it's necessary to understand the history in order to look forward to the future. It is very necessary, and to get the lessons learned. And one of the issues that we can talk about is this Nile River had, let's say, a unique system governing its water, and you cannot change it all of a sudden. If there is any intention or any need to change it, it has to be collectively agreed upon. This is one comment that I have when I have seen your presentations. The second presentation, the second comment is about the necessity of cooperation among the riparian countries. If I may use a better word, with the inevitability of cooperation and coordination among all the riparian countries. This is inevitable. A lot of challenges, a lot of political elements are involved, but we have to coordinate. We cannot live apart from each other because we have this river connecting us, and we cannot live apart. We have to coordinate in using this river. Unfortunately, we do not have reached yet this unified vision of how we are going to deal with this source of life to all of us. There are interests, of course. Each country has its own interest in the river Nile. But the balance between these interests is not reached this. As we have witnessed, or we see in the maps, in the history books, that there are countries that depends only on the river Nile, like Egypt. 97% of its water resources come from the river Nile. We do not have any other alternatives. Others have. So how we can create this balance between these interests? This is what we missing. These are my two comments, and the third one is the cultural element. How do we see this river? How the Egyptians see it, the Sudanese, South Sudanese, Ethiopians, Ugandan, Kenyans, how do they see this river? In their own culture and their own perspectives. This is very an element that I've almost reached half of your book now. I got the book and I've read half of it. Yeah. No, not not the future of the Nile. About the British Empire and the yeah. I've read half of it. Unfortunately I didn't have that time to complete reading it, but I see an element of this cultural element. How these people, the people of the Nile, see the river. This is an element that I think could lead us to let's say a key on how to future deal with this source of life. These are my three comments for the time being, and thank you very much again for the presentation, and I hope we will be able to meet you again, but when I finish the book, in order to prepare more questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lama and then Zariu.
Thank you once again for your presentation and for the videos. We've previously had a conversation, me and Terry, about this, and this is also a comment that I want to build upon, is that I often find that speaking about the Nile, and especially around the history, and again around the sort of what happens, and especially it always translates into a political discussion, and hence, and also obviously an economic discussion. And what are the utilitarian uses of the water body of the Nile? But no one I've yet to see speaks about the agency of the Nile as a river body with its environmental integrity. No one has yet to speak about what that means in terms of us continuously over-exploiting this river body in terms of agricultural means or infrastructures like dams or otherwise. We cease to begin to explore what it means to actually deplete this water resource entirely, and no one speaks about the environmental integrity of what that means for this river body. So I'm wondering if you have any comments or suggestions on how that can begin to be mainstreamed into the negotiations and the discussions around the Nile, because that conversation is not happening at all. Everyone speaks about the politics, the boundaries, the infrastructure projects, the agricultural schemes, the economic uses of exploitation. But no one speaks about the actual integrity of the Nile as it stands.
Thank you very much, Lama, for this question. Who speaks for the river? There are other rivers like the Ganges who recently have been granted legal rights as a person. Also, the rights of those rivers, like the Ganges, can be also defended into a court. It's not the case for the Nile yet, but maybe that's something the Nile Basin Initiative might consider. Zagin.
Thank you very much. I'm Zagin, Minister Counselor from the Ethiopian Embassy from Nairobi, and I frequently travel to Addis, and I am a good friend and brother of Yassir. We work together on this Nile issue. Like Ambassador Yassir, I have no question, but I have some comments, especially when it comes to the understanding of the Nile as one geographic and political unit. I will start with that. I could say it wasn't the British actually which started, that was Khedive Ismail, who tried to put the whole Nile Valley under the green flag of Egypt, which paved the way later for the British to understand it that way and to control the Nile from its source to its mouth. So I would say it was more of indigenous than a colonial project. The initial idea was Egyptian, and especially from Khedive Ismail. And in this connection also, the problem is, I believe, the epistemic community as well. The way we frame the Nile, the way we understand the Nile, the way we narrate the different issues about the Nile. Sometimes we frame it as, we have these conceptions like, for instance, war in Ethiopia is peace in Egypt, and peace in Ethiopia is war in Egypt. And he who controls the Nile controls Egypt. For instance, Professor Terry said the British was more focused on the Suez Canal, and to create stability, Britain had to do something in controlling the Nile. Such kind of framings and perspectives in the Nile, I believe, are haunting us today. That is the real problem. The mistrust and the mutual suspicion that grew with the Nile politics is this one. And we need to change this discourse. We need to change this framing. And in this regard, the role of the epistemic community is really crucial. And we need to frame the Nile, as Lama said, for instance, we need to speak for the river itself. It's only when the river exists that we can talk about the river, we can talk about the benefits of the river. That is really important as well. And we should believe that the Nile is a matter of life for all the basin countries. Earlier, Ambassador Yassir said, for instance, 97% of Egypt's water is from the Nile. And in Ethiopia, for instance, 70% of the water for Ethiopia is from the Nile. And 2/3 of its hydroelectric potential is from the Nile. 2/3 of its irrigation potential is from the Nile. And more than nearly 40 million people directly live in the basin. So it's a matter of life also for the Sudan. And almost Uganda is in the Nile basin, 100%. This clearly shows you that the Nile is a matter of life for all the basin countries, and maintaining the health and the environmental integrity of the basin is crucial. And yes, we need to coordinate, we need to cooperate. Cooperation has no option in the Nile basin. It's a mess. And the basin have come through a long way, and we have a multilateral and a first basin-wide organization, the Nile Basin Initiative, and we have all the countries actually negotiated and agreed on the cooperative framework agreement. Yes, we have some differences with Egypt and some with Sudan, but it is signed by 6 countries and ratified by 3, and the remaining 3 countries are in the process of ratification, and we should build on this. There is no need to reinvent the wheel. We have to build on our experiences and reach on at a certain point that is beneficiary to all the basin countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe let's leave Terry a chance to reply.
The power of history on the current development of the Nile Basin is, of course, very, very heavy. I mean, and the only way I think, available if you want to liberate yourself from the power of history is to learn about it, because only when you know it, you can fight it. Because these kinds of ideas about using the Nile as a punishment, using control of the Nile as a political weapon, is there. It has been there for a long time, and a lot of stories are going around. You do not get rid of all these stories by closing the door to the past, but by discussing the past. That's why I think this kind of history is very important. But on the other hand, it of course also demonstrates the fact that up to now, as you say, the interest in the Nile has been very much limited to different states' political and economic interests, and very few have been talking on behalf of the river. I mean, if you should summarize the literature on the Nile up to today, you will find that, I mean, there is a striking absence of literature taking the Nile as a river, as a starting point. And in order to do that, I think that you have to, a precondition for that is exactly that you liberate yourself from the power of history by criticizing this history. And just a small comment about whether this was an indigenous idea, I mean, Muhammad Ali or not. Of course, Muhammad Ali had visions about the Nile being an Egyptian Nile, but it was first during the British that they really were able to formulate a vision of the Nile as a political and hydrological unity with a number of plans in order to control it from the source to the mouth. That was not possible in the 19th century, but the British managed to do it. So that's why I think that in order to overcome some of these limitations of the past, critique of the British period, not, I mean, the point is not at all what the British did was wrong or whatever, no. They did a lot of beneficial things, both to Sudan and Egypt and Uganda, I think. But on the other hand, the way they conceptualized the whole river has, of course, been very detrimental to some of those alternative issues or perspectives that you are talking about. Bringing the Nile into the picture as an agency of its own, so to speak, not part of geopolitical strategies or world. I mean, the Nile, after all, played a very important role in Britain's aim for world dominance. And of course, it should be liberated. I mean, the river should be liberated from that kind of role.
Thank you very much.